So before we begin the discussion, I want to say that all credit for these translations go to Kanzenshu.com and specifically Sailor Spaz, Stacy, who has taken time to translate these interviews from the Dragon Ball Super movie pamphlet, the movie program that came out back in December when the Broly movie had first come out. And there's a lot of really interesting tidbits here. We're going to look at two interviews, one from Tatsuya Nagamine, and which is the director of the film, and one from Naohiro Shintani, the designer, the character designer for the movie and the future of Dragon Ball. Now, what's interesting about Nagamine, and we're going to go right into it here. I'm not going to read the entire translation. I'll leave a link for y'all to look at it, but I do want to point out some really interesting tidbits about Toriyama and Broly and some stuff that we had not known before these interviews. This is all new information, and it just got translated recently, even though the pamphlet came out like a month ago. So I want to go ahead and dive into it. So the first thing Nagamine talks about here is Toriyama and his requests to, his request for the film. Now, he does note that Toriyama was at the private screening for the staff. So for one of the rare occasions, Toriyama did indeed leave the house, because he never leaves the house, and he attended the private screening, and he pretty much just told him when he first got the script, Toriyama just told him, just do it right, which is great because that's classic Toriyama. He's not a very controlling type of guy, and neither is Nagamine. And he talks about how there were some ways that he had to shave the movie, because for those of you who don't know, we've talked about this a lot. The original script Toriyama submitted was a 3-hour script. So it was too long to make it to a movie, according to Nagamine, so he cut it down here and there. Now, obviously, as Dragon Ball fans, I'm sure we all would love to see the original 3-hour script or to see the movie had a 3-hour cut, but there's nothing at all that indicates that there's a director's cut of this movie. So those of you who have been waiting for a director's cut or an extended cut, it's probably not going to happen. Now, I can't confirm that because maybe there is some animation on the cutting room floor, but it's not confirmed. But he does talk about how he had to shave things to cut it down to about 100 minutes, like shaving some words here and there, small bits and whatnot. And he didn't want the movie to be too jam-packed, so he had to give it room to breathe. Now, that's all well and good. And they talk about, Broly being in the previous, Broly having older movies directed by Shigeyasu Yamauchi, who is the mentor of Nagamine. So, of course, he had a lot of pressure on him to make this right. And he does talk about how he wanted to make Broly's popularity explode even more. And I do think that the homages, which is what they talk about here, I did a whole Easter egg homage video about it, are done to kind of pay tribute to his mentor's older movies, the older Broly movies that he directed, as well as to give Broly new life. And then when they asked him what he thought he put the most impact into as far as when he got the storyboards, when he was creating them, was the final Kamehameha at the end of the movie. He even wanted to make it seem like the Kamehameha was so powerful that normal enemies would have died 3 times. And he even says that most of the Dragon Ball movies end with the villain losing by a big move. But in this movie, the big move missed. It did miss him, and Broly did, of course, survive, because Toriyama did not want to kill Broly in this film because, to me, he doesn't say this, but we can all kind of figure this out. There are bigger plans in the future for Broly. And one thing I do like about what he says here, he talks about how when they had the dragon being summoned at the end of the movie and the sky turned black, it gave them an opportunity to have a very colorful battle with the whole thing being dark, and kind of the only thing lighting up the room was Goku and Broly's ki, their power, and the volcano lava stuff, right? The lava stuff. So that was cool. That was very, 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 very cool. And to me, I like that. Like, I love that about the movie, that he did that. There's just tons of stuff here. I'll leave a link. Now, what I think is interesting about the Shintani side of this interview, which what I think is very interesting, is he talks about Toriyama and Broly's transformations. Now, I got a video coming out soon that's going to go in depth into all of Broly's forms in the film, including that suppressed Uzaru Great Ape form that many fans have been saying is like a tribute to Super Saiyan 4, or they think it's Toriyama's way of creating Super Saiyan 4 in the, retconning it, or some would say canonizing it, but it's not really Super Saiyan 4 yet, but there's definitely a similarity there. I'll go into that in more detail in that video. But when he talks about Nagamine, Shintani, when he had to go in and redesign these characters for an anime format from Toriyama's original, you know, blueprint, is he talks about how how early Dragon Ball did not use a lot of shading, so they wanted to go with the same approach, which is why we were talking about how when the first posters came out, it looks like old school Dragon Ball Z, like early Dragon Ball Z and late Dragon Ball, like, you know, Saiyan Saga, Tournament, 23rd Budokai Arc, stuff like that. And that was purposely done to make the animators, to give them kind of, you know, less, less constraints. But also he talks about how the everyday life scenes were given less shading, which is why the scene where they're like, that comedy scene where they're talking about fusing, why that scene was so, so cartoony. I've seen people try to take bits of that and say it's bad animation, but no, it's supposed to be purposely cartoony. And he talks about how Toriyama designed Shilai and Lemo, and this is the interesting point right here, he says that Broly was a different story altogether. And I'm going to read this right now and kind of talk about it because this is very interesting to me. He says that the only designs he received from Toriyama of Broly, because Broly redesigned Toriyama, were him wearing his armor, and it gave off a very different impression than the Broly of the past. So basically, Toriyama only drew Broly in his armor. So those scenes that you see of Broly wearing the Ba ear as like a fur, like the fur thing, the fur from his friend Ba on planet Vampa, that's stuff that Nagamine himself created. Now, what I think is interesting is this right here I'm about to read to y'all. He says, personally, I had a very strong image of Broly based on the previous movies, so I created my own design for him at full power from scratch. I just had the urge to see him lose his shirt and run wild at the end. Toriyama had stated that he didn't want him to be overly macho, so I aimed to make him as huge as possible, but still within the confines of not going overboard with it. So the form that you see in the movie, that is pretty much a modern version of Legendary Super Saiyan, which is the form that we saw in the old Broly movies where he has no shirt and he's ripped to shreds, he's an animal. Nagamine took that design, added the scars, kind of, gave it a different kind of look, and that's how we got full power Broly. Now, what's interesting to me, what I think is interesting is I wonder if this means that this form, the full power Broly form, if that actually is its own form from the mouth of Toriyama. What I mean by that is, obviously when Broly goes full power, in the old movies it was Legendary Super Saiyan. That's an actual form from the guidebooks. What I wonder is, did Toriyama even think of giving him that form, or did he even write in the notes, give him one more form? It's implied that he didn't. So that tells me, and that makes you wonder, okay, is Toriyama even... I mean, obviously he approved the movie because he saw the movie and he liked it, but obviously it makes you wonder if he even wanted to even go that route with Broly. But it just, I think it worked because it was a tie-in to the old stuff. And he goes into more detail about, how he designed the faces. He talks about the image of Goku as an infant from Jocko and how much influence they had from Jocko. And, the original Jocko manga, which, by the way, if you have not read, you definitely need to get on that for sure. And then he talks about, they asked him what his favorite character is. He says Paragus, and he goes into, how he liked that Paragus, was a very different kind of aesthetic for him. And they even talk about, how they wanted him to look as smelly as possible when they first found him, but that when Frieza's forces kind of gave him good clothing, he looked more presentable, which to me it seems like a more obvious thing. He also talks about the whole fact that they had to use different kinds of effects they never used before. Of course, if you watch the movie, when Broly does go full power, they kind of have this sort of dark, sort of real eclectic kind of color mix there when they're in that alternate universe pocket dimension part of the fight. You see that there. You see them trying new things with this movie. And I really hope, a lot of people have been asking this question, will Nagamine be the designer when Super comes back, when Dragon Ball Super returns to television? Will they use, not Nagamine, I'm sorry, Shintani. Will they use Shintani's designs? And I think it's inevitable. I think enough animators have constantly talked about how much easier it is to use his designs compared to Tadayoshi Yamamuro. And I have nothing against Yamamuro. He's done great work in the past. But Shintani's designs are just easier and more fluid. And I think that if Super comes back, it should look as close as possible to this movie. Obviously, it won't look as good because the budget probably won't be as big. And it's not a theatrical movie, but as long as it looks and it captures that same kind of energy that the movie captured, which is, of course, classic Dragon Ball manga, I think it'll be fine. So they even talk about how there were, and of course we talked about this a lot, there were more homages in the film. He even talks about how keep your eyes peeled for the music and the fan service, which we all talked about. So the movie was a pretty good mix of bringing in new stuff as well as taking, giving you a little wink wink to the old stuff. So I do hope Shintani sticks around. I think Nagamine should also stick around because he determined a power, and it wasn't the most perfect arc ever, but it was, the best arc in Super for whatever that's worth, in my opinion. So I think he could stick around because the movie was so good. Anyways, I'll leave a link to the Kanzenshuu article. Let me know what you think in the comments about Toriyama not using the old Broly design. I wonder if Toriyama had actually done the entire story himself without any help from these guys, Shintani, Nagamine. If it was just him doing the manga, if Broly would have even gotten that form. I wonder if Broly was just going to fight in the armor for most of the movie, or for all the movie. He did fight in the armor for most of it, but not all. So that's it. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you guys in the next one.